you had to find that thing that's really about you or what you care deeply, and I kind of go back to when I finally was able to like marry my environmental activism and ideas with my artwork. That's when it really became meaningful to me.
Welcome to the Flying Fruit Bowl, a platform dedicated to discussion and exploration of art in the creative process. I'm your host and creator, Aaron S., and for this week's episode, I had a conversation with the amazing Rebecca Youssef. Rebecca is an artist based in LA who creates eco-driven mixed media art. Using sustainable materials such as cardboard and grocery bags, Rebecca challenges us to rethink the concept of value within art and asks us to question how we decide what is and what isn't valuable. So I'm going to start where I start with everybody, which is just tell us a bit about yourself and how you became an artist.
Sure. I'm Rebecca Youssef. I'm a Los Angeles-based mixed media artist using repurposed, recycled materials in an effort to have a more sustainable, zero-waste studio. I never thought or planned I'd become an artist. I've always been creative. I come from a really creative family. My sister, my cousin are both graphic designers. My aunt was a fashion designer. My mother always wanted to become an architect, but she chose or felt she had to choose like a safer path. So she became a teacher. And I remember my parents telling me when I went off to college and I was still undecided about what to study, they said, choose a profession that's always in demand. World will always need teachers or nurses, etc. And so I always had that in the back of my mind. Up until college, art had always been a way for me to escape or as like a coping mechanism. My family moved from the East Coast of the United States to Hawaii, which was 6,000 miles away.
That's insane.
Yeah, when I was 9 years old. And so, we left a huge family behind and all my friends. And oh man, I was so sad. And I hated being the new kid in a new place, new culture, everything. And so I started writing a lot. And, writing these stories, always about a girl like my age doing all these crazy things. And then I started illustrating those stories. And in fourth grade, I won this like writing and drawing contest. And that was like my first taste of validation that I was kind of good at something. But my parents were never super supportive of me wanting to study art. So when I went off to college, I just took a bunch of classes, different classes, and I found that I just loved anything having to do with art or horticulture. So I took a bunch of theater classes, architecture, art history, botany, desert horticulture, but it was when I took my first painting class that I felt like, okay, this is what I should be doing. And so I became a painting and ceramics major. That's how it all started.
That's a very fascinating trajectory. And actually, so one of the great things about me doing these interviews is that everybody has such a different beginning. Like, even if the end goal in many ways is similar, like everybody's start is so different. Because I think it's fascinating that your parents actually weren't that supportive of you being an artist, yet here you are as a full-time artist. Like, that's really fascinating because, that shows a lot of determination and skill on your part as well. That's the thing. Because, I think your parents, it's easy to be influenced by what your parents want you to do. And I know a lot of people who are like lawyers and doctors because that's what their parents wanted them to be. But to be something like an artist, I think that's actually really, really fascinating. And so writing, okay, I'm going to say fascinating a lot in this interview because that is fascinating. But like writing, there's something about words and language that I feel like conjures up really good visuals. So it's not a surprise that writing kind of got you started into kind of the creative journey. And is that something you still use in your work now?
Yeah, it's funny. I've never kept up a consistent sketchbook. I'm not a big sketcher. Even in art school, professors, I mean, it was like they were always getting on me about not sketching because I prefer to write. I feel like getting your ideas down on paper and really hashing out those ideas, that's what helped me kind of formulate the work much more so than kind of sketching it out. Because I always had an idea of what it was going to look like in my head, but I had to really figure out conceptually, well, what is it I'm trying to say and convey here.
So why is art important to you?
Well, like I said, art was always my escape and my coping mechanism. I was that kid who was always like doodling in the margins of my notebooks while I was supposed to be taking notes in class. So like drawing and doodling allowed me to sort of drift off into a more interesting place than where I was. And it was also a way to decompress because it was relaxing. Because I think after we moved, that was really stressful. The first like year, it was really stressful being in this new environment. And I used to draw a lot of patterns and did a lot of line work. And I would fill notebooks with these little hash marks that would form these elaborate patterns. And there was something just really meditative about it. So early on, I think art was more therapeutic than anything else.
I just think it's an interesting question to ask, because I feel like, at least I wonder, like, how many artists actually sit down and ask themselves why art is important to them, because it's something you've dedicated your life to. It's like, it's now like a part of you. And it's kind of interesting to see how you've kind of got from the stage of like, looking at it as an outsider to now becoming part of you. Because I think, not everybody is necessarily creative, or not everybody is necessarily an artist. So it's always nice just to think about why it's important to you, and also like why you have decided that this is what you want to do. I don't know. I think being introspective is always a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And like the origin story of like, how were you drawn to it? So yeah, it wasn't just like, oh, I love art and I love taking art classes. It was really more out of a necessity. Like I needed to find a way to decompress and to process everything going on.
Yeah, because I think you're right. Like it's an outlet, isn't it? It's like catharsis. It just gives you, as you said, yeah, it's escapism, which I think a lot of artists use art as escapism. And I think there's something really fascinating about that in terms of like feeling the need to escape from reality. There's something very interesting there in terms of like the whole idea of that kind of whole conversation. But anyway, getting back to these questions. Okay, so you studied at the University of Arizona for painting and ceramics, and you got your master's in art education. So what was the experience of studying an art-based subject, and like what are your thoughts on art education?
Well, speaking from when I taught art, I'll start with that.
Yeah.
So I've taught art with kids ranging in age from 3 to 18. And you know who the best artists are? Take a guess.
The 3-year-olds.
3-year-olds.
Yeah.
They are incredible because, they're not self-conscious yet.
Yeah.
You'll never hear
exactly.
a 3 or 4-year-old saying, I can't draw. I'm not artistic. They haven't learned any cliches yet. They just express themselves in the most pure form. And that starts to wane as soon as they get into grade school. They start to draw from memory and not draw from what they see. The house drawing being like the quintessential example. You have this house, it has a door, it's got 2 windows and the smokestack with the curly cue of smoke coming out of it, the sun off in the corner with the beams, right? Yeah. Kids will start to be concerned about how their art looks and if it's rendered perfectly. And then when I taught high school, which is ages like 14 to 18 in the States, first day of class, without fail, kids would come in and say, I can't draw. I'm not artistic. And I always had to explain that I didn't care if they could draw. I wasn't concerned with perfect rendering. I was interested in how they interpret what they see. we can all witness the exact same event, but when asked individually what we saw, we'd all have a different take on it. And the same goes for when you're looking at the same still life. You won't see what I see, and I really want to see how it appears through your eyes. The art education curriculum has changed a lot from the time I was in art school to the time that I was in grad school. When I was in art school, I never heard the term social justice used. Art making was very self-referential. It was all about me and my experience, etc. Now art is not only used as an accessible tool for communication, but also for raising awareness about social issues, and in turn being able to actually have positive change, enact change. The art making that I was doing and that I saw being made in art school wasn't necessarily created to enact any change. It was more to document an experience, which isn't a bad thing. That's how it was. But yeah, no, it's really changing into more of kind of like a purpose-driven art curriculum, which is cool, which is great.
That's a really interesting way to actually consider art in terms of documenting an experience, or kind of like emphasizing change. I'm going to write this down because I feel like that's going to be like a potential future question or consideration somewhere.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, we are documentarians as artists. That's kind of part of the job, is to document what is going on at the time, and it can really influence culture and enact change. But I think, for some reason, when I was in art school, that wasn't the focus. Now it seems to be like the focus, like how can we really be part of a positive impact and change.
See, that's a really good consideration. And actually, it's kind of interesting because the very first artist I interviewed for the podcast, a really, really wonderful artist called Anne Symes, her work is all about change and about like positivity. And it's about, making sure that we understand the idea of beauty and topics such as that. And I think it's kind of interesting that people turn to art to invoke change or to raise awareness, because I think art's so much more accessible to a lot of people, as opposed to like, say being an influencer or having a large platform, say, for instance. And like, do you feel like anyone could be an artist?
Yeah, I do. I don't see why not. Now, are you asking, like, do people need to have an arts education?
Well, isn't art education important to be an artist? Like, do artists need some kind of formal education?
No, they don't need it. But I mean, I loved going to art school because I did things that there was so much experimentation. Experimentation was highly encouraged. And you aren't creating art under the guise of, I gotta make this marketable. I need to sell this. It is strictly just like reckless abandonment, like just go crazy and try everything. And I mean, I've only saved a few paintings from art school because most of them were shit. And that's how it should be.
Yeah. Actually, that's a good consideration, actually. So rather than like an artist necessarily going to like art school per se, because I always feel like I did a photography degree, and for me, like, it was the connections I made in that year, those few years, it was more than a year, in those few years that I went there, I think they were a lot more longer lasting than whatever I was taught, because I feel like whatever you're taught isn't really necessary for you to become any kind of creative. It's just kind of more ticking boxes. But I feel like it's connections you make. But actually, maybe if people just had the ability to have like a period of time, like maybe say a year, just to experiment and try to kind of almost find themselves as an artist, or at least kind of try new things as an artist, because I kind of feel like a lot of the time you're kind of tied down by the kind of box you put yourself in. You know, you kind of say like, oh, I'm an abstract artist, or I'm a figurative artist, or I'm a landscape artist, or I'm a, graphic designer. You kind of put a label on what you do, and that kind of sometimes ties you down. And like yourself, for instance, like you are many things actually. So it's kind of interesting to see you be kind of multidisciplinarian. But like, how do you define yourself without putting yourself into a box?
Um, well, I don't mind the box.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I feel like I have a niche that I don't mind if, you know, I'm sort of pigeonholed as, oh, you're that artist that uses repurposed materials and you grow trees and you're trying to inform people about that. Like, I don't mind. Like, that is what I do. And that's fine with me. Yeah, that's kind of funny. Yeah, I don't mind the box. The box is fine. Put me in a box. I don't care.
That's actually very interesting. I feel like a lot of artists I've spoken to very much don't like the idea of being boxed in, even though it kind of comes with the territory of being an artist. Because at some point, someone will ask you what you do, and given your answer, they will make an informed decision of what you
Mhm.
are because of what you do. I think that's really, really interesting that you actually don't care, you don't mind for the box, and actually that it's not an issue for you, which I think is, I guess, in a way, it could be good because it gives you your own limitations. It allows you to be able to figure out what you can and what you can't do, or what you do or what you don't want to do.
Hmm.
Because I think
Yeah, well,
sometimes,
because I know what I'm doing. I know my lane, and um, it's I'm not something super specific like I'm a landscape painter or I'm the kind of art that I create, which I feel like more purpose driven and materials based. And it's more sort of an ideology than it is necessarily like a genre of painting. I don't consider myself just like an upcycle artist or something like that.
mm.
But there's, kind of more ideas behind it. So, I mean, yeah, I don't feel boxing but yeah, I don't really pay attention to it actually.
So you're a full-time artist. What was the leap like into being a full-time artist?
Oh, that's a good question because I mean, I dreamt of being an artist for about the last 15 years, but I had three small kids during that time and it wasn't possible. Once they were all in school, I started getting back into my art practice little by little, and I've been back at it mostly full time for the last 6 or 7 years.
Wow.
But, I used to lay in bed at night and just create in my head, thinking, okay, one day I'm going to get back at it. But right now, I can't. And I remember I was laying in bed one night when my first child was a baby. And that was the time I remember specifically the night I had the idea to work on paper bags. I'm like, one day I'm going to do that. So timing has to be right. But there also has to be an element of just going for it. It's a leap of faith.
Absolutely.
But yeah, the timing's got to be right.
So the reason I ask, because I talk to a lot of artists who want to be full-time artists, but they just don't know
Mhm.
how or when to make that transition. And it's kind of like, I always say to people, not that I'm anyone to give any advice, but I always say to people like, enjoy doing stuff part-time, because when you're a full-time artist, you're going to be doing art 24/7 and it will be, all consuming. And I wanted to ask you, like, are there any drawbacks to being a full-time artist? And like, do you have any advice for anyone who wants to become a full-time artist?
Um, the drawbacks, I think, just all the wearing of all the different hats as a full time artist. Especially when you'd rather just be in your studio creating all the time, but there's a lot of other, you know, things you got to tend to. However, I will say I'm starting to embrace the the business side of being an artist. The learning curve is tough at
Yeah,
times, but I like to control everything. So,
absolutely. Yeah.
I'm a control freak. So if I have to learn a new app or a new platform, then, I just suck it up and do it. At the beginning of the pandemic, I turned my online portfolio into an e-commerce site. And I swear I must have watched like every Squarespace webinar there was out there. But, I just have a problem with outsourcing. And I couldn't outsource my website. I didn't know exactly what I wanted, and I knew I had to learn how to do it myself. And for the most part, I did. Um, and another challenge, probably the biggest challenge for me, is the constant having to market your work and try and get as many eyes on it as possible. And especially when you are battling self-doubt or questioning the quality of your work, because you go up and down. You'll love
Yeah.
something you make, and then you'll hate everything you're making. But you constantly have to get it out there. So to be putting it out there when you're not feeling good about it is just mentally, it's tough. But yeah, I mean, it's a necessary evil. Mm.
So how do you actually determine your self-worth as an artist?
I think once I started marrying my environmentalism with my art, because I used to keep them very separate. Both, I was equally passionate about both, but for whatever reason, I just didn't know how to bring them together. And when I did finally marry the two, it was like magic. I mean, it changed everything for me. And I feel like once I tapped into that, something that I cared deeply for and was able to express it through my art, it reinforced in me that what I'm doing is right and good, not necessarily like good aesthetically, but just good as
Yeah.
in,
Like it just feels right, and you feel like you're doing the right thing without knowing if you are doing the right thing.
exactly.
Because I feel like only because like art is so subjective, and we'll get onto your work in a second. But art is very, very subjective, and I feel like as somebody who creates art, it's very, very hard to see how other people see you and your work, and also your work is also a part of you. So it's like it's hard to determine kind of like your own value because you're the one creating the work. You know how long it took. You know the effort it took to make. So it's hard to kind of really figure out if it's worth anything, or if so, what is it worth? Because obviously you're selling your work, you're trying to make money, you want to make a living. So it's like, how do you actually, and this probably was a question for later, but he's never in order, so it's fine. But like, how do you kind of determine price? And I was talking about pricing, I've got to work it. But anyway, how do you determine like the pricing of your work? Or like kind of how do you set like a certain kind of standard for your work? And like, oh, I'm not going to go below this price.
Oh, that was really hard in the beginning. Um, and then I think if you're as prolific as I am,
Yes.
You want work to just get out of your studio. And so you kind of come up with a pricing system that's like, okay, I can let this go and be out of my life forever at this price point. And kind of that's the jumping off point. And plus, even when I was in grad school, I could never part with any of my work. It was really weird. And then something shifted as I got into my full-time art practice and I was just creating. I then, not that I became detached from it, but I was able to let it go. And so yeah, creating a price structure, I mean, that's hard, but I do have one in place and I'm comfortable with it. I also want to keep my work accessible.
Yes.
And so it's, at all different price points. That's why I love working big, but I also will work small so that, I have something for everyone.
So I wonder if you at grad school not letting go of your work is because you didn't know if you were going to create any more necessarily in the future. But because you're a full-time artist now, you know that if you get rid of everything that you've created now, you'll create more because the ideas are always there.
Yeah, and I think also in art school, I was using so many different materials. I mean, I would paint on anything and use anything to paint with. So I was experimenting with all these different materials, and that I think every time I produced something, it felt so original to me. Like, oh, I've never worked with sheet metal before. Oh, I've never worked with corrugated tin. And so I just kind of wanted to like hang on to all of it because it represented a piece of a place and time for me. And yeah, like I don't know if I'll ever work with corrugated tin again. So I kind of wanted to like just hold on to everything. And now I'm ready to release it all.
That's a really interesting idea, the idea of like art as a marker for time.
Yeah.
You give me a lot of really interesting kind of like vague ideas and thoughts that might become questions or just considerations that I'm going to sit down and think about. As a marker for time. That's really interesting consideration because it's like your art really is just a document of your time. That's all it really is. In many ways, like that sounds very basic, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but that's all it kind of is I always say to people like social media is just about existence. It's not really about anything else. It's about reminding people you exist. That's really what it is. It's not about actually anything else beyond that. And I feel like art might be the same. Maybe the creation of art is just to remind people we still exist, because at the end of the day, if we don't make art and we don't make things, people won't remember. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe. So for those who have not seen it, can you please describe your work?
Sure. Well, first, I don't buy any commercially made paper products. I use materials that have been deemed used or disposable. I reuse and upcycle cardboard boxes, paper bags, or I make paper myself from, junk mail and my kids' schoolwork.
Yes, I've seen the YouTube video, yes.
Oh, I always forget about that. I really strive to put green methods at the heart of my art practice. I'm not 100% there by any means, but it's something I'm always thinking about. My work really serves as a conversation starter surrounding environmental issues while showcasing the longevity of the materials I use beyond their original function. I want to challenge the definition of value and beauty. I like exploring like what makes something valuable, and can a low status utilitarian material like cardboard be elevated to something of beauty and then deemed valuable? That's sort of a theme I'm interested in, and it spills over into the reforestation work that I do with planting trees. Like, how do I get people to value trees and see them as a necessity and not something that's merely decorative, etc. But yeah, that's a whole other story. But there are a lot of parallels between the two. And then I also use, I've been saving all my used drop cloths for years. I mean, I've had a pile of them thinking, okay, one day I'm going to use them for something, because I just can't throw it. I have a problem. Every time I throw something away, I think about like the landfills. So like, I cannot put these drop cloths in the trash. So I've been saving them, and now I've been starting to rip them up and using them in my collages. So that's been fun.
So that's incredibly fascinating. And I actually really love the idea of taking stuff that is quote unquote, trash, I guess in many ways people would say, and turning it into art and actually giving it a value. And actually how interesting it is that something that is considered art is considered more valuable than something that is already just what it is. Like that's a really interesting conversation as well. Like the idea of value and how do we value things. And I think that's a really fascinating idea, actually, particularly cardboard. And I actually really want to talk to you about your cardboard collages series.
Mhm.
But before we do that, I just want to ask you the idea of like your work is very abstract, I guess. It's probably one of the best ways to put it. I don't know if you like that term.
I don't mind it.
Okay. Okay. I'm glad because the question's about abstract art. So yeah, like so do you think that abstract art is underappreciated?
Um, well, so I compare abstract art to comedic acting.
Okay.
Comedic acting looks like it's easier to do than, say, like dramatic acting,
Yeah.
but it's a lot harder to do and do it well. How about that?
Yes, that is actually a
That makes
really,
sense.
really great. Yeah, that's actually a really great kind of parallel, actually. You're right. And the reason I ask is because I don't know if anybody's probably noticed, but you are the first quote unquote abstract artist I've spoken to in about what, 50, over 50 episodes? Because
Oh,
I, this is probably a very bad confession, but I have no idea, or at least I'm never really comfortable talking about abstract art because I find it very hard because it's very intuitive. It's not necessarily aesthetic in the same way, say, like a landscape or a portrait is, where you know what you're looking at. So I'm
hmm.
always really interested in, and actually the conversation I had with one of my good artist friends, and I was saying about we were talking about abstract art, and I said to him, if I ever if I ever interview any abstract artists, I'll send them over to you for some questions, which is funny. I was like, I have no idea what to say. But it was kind of interesting just because, like, do you think that your work being more intuitive and more kind of considered gives you any advantages over, say, like traditional landscapes or traditional portraits?
Well, it's funny because I don't, even though I say, oh, I'm an abstract mixed media artist, I don't really um, identify as much with the abstract part
Hmm.
because I'm such a process based
Yeah,
artist and a materials based that I tend to forget that, oh, yeah, okay, this is not representational or landscape, etc. Although sometimes my abstract works, I think they look very um, much like landscapes.
yeah.
Maybe that's just me.
Where did the idea of using this media techniques come from?
Well, like I said, in art school, we were really, really encouraged to experiment, try all different materials, etc. But when I was in art school, I didn't have a lot of money,
Yeah.
so I think that's where the using found objects came from because I just couldn't afford a lot of art supplies, and so I started going to thrift stores to buy. For some reason, the thrift store by my house sold old hospital sheets, like
Oh.
used hospital sheets.
That is
And they were only 50 cents, which,
that's that's cheap, but that's a bit disconcerting actually.
I know it was a little weird. So there are these sheets, they had the hospital name stamped on them. And so I used to buy those, and that was what I would use for canvas. And I had a professor who, always encouraged us, like, he loved uh, flat latex house paint. He's like, it's great. That's what he used in his artwork. And like I remember him saying, don't ever buy gesso. Go buy white, flat latex house paint. That's all you need. And that's still to this day what I use. I've
Oh.
never bought gesso. So, the local hardware stores used to, or they still do. They had a paint section that people would return. They didn't like the
Yes.
color or something was wrong, called the oops section. And so
Yeah.
they would sell it for a fraction of the price. And I still go and I buy like the oops paint that nobody else wants. I love it. I love latex paint. And we were just encouraged to be creative, but it also came out of necessity just because I didn't have a lot of money at the time. um but yeah, and I still put all that into practice.
See, I think there's something really, really refreshing about this very kind of like almost DIY kind of not aesthetic, but the DIY feel of like you don't have to have the best of everything to create great work. You can create work with whatever you have with you right now. There are going to be things around your home, or there'll be things you can find on your trip to work that you can use. that can become a part of your work. And I think that's interesting because those objects hold some kind of value just for you personally, as much as the work, the piece of work or the final image will hold value to somebody else. And I think that's really fascinating as well. Like it's a document, as we said earlier, it's a document of your time. But also it's also like a sign of how times have changed because like you would never get hospital sheets in thrift stores now. Like that would never happen. And you just I don't know. I just really like this idea of let's use what we have, not let's buy everything. Because I feel like a lot of the time nowadays, especially, there's a huge emphasis on what materials do you use, what paint do you use, what quality of materials do you use. Why aren't you buying this? You need to buy this. You must buy this. You must have this. And it's like art isn't about status. Art is about doing. And I think we've kind of lost that sometimes along the way, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and that's why the materials that I do use, especially like cardboard, it is a very like low status material, and that's part of what interests me in using it. I mean, I love the physicality of it too, but I also just love kind of like what it symbolizes, even though it doesn't have really any stigmas attached to it. I think we're all pretty neutral when it comes to cardboard. There's no like agenda there. And everybody, just about everyone on the planet has probably had, an interaction with this material. And, you don't think of it.
I think it's absolutely fascinating because also such an accessible material as well, though. That's the thing.
The most ubiquitous in the world, I think.
Yeah, it really is. It's when you actually sit down and think about it, it's actually insane how much is prevalent in everyday life because it's literally everywhere. You can't buy anything or you can't have most things without some kind of cardboard box.
Right. But it's also one of the most sustainable because cardboard has a highly, what's the word? A really high recyclable rate. Rate. Yeah. So I think it's something in the high 80s, like 88% of all cardboard is recycled. And the turnaround time is about 14 days to recycle it into new product. So it's pretty sustainable product. It's come a long way.
So I'm actually really curious because I really love your cardboard collages series. I think it's just really interesting. Just the use of material is just absolutely fascinating. And also like just how you repurpose it as well. Like that's what's interesting is that like you're taking something that is around us all the time and transforming it into something new and different. And kind of, as you said, kind of higher value, I guess. But like, does, having such an available material affect how much you create?
That's a good question. Well, first, I've always loved cardboard, and I love how accessible and universal it is. Its utilitarian nature. I mean, it's so useful. And anyone and everyone has access to it. I like that. It is readily available. I love the physical, properties of it. When you get it wet, you can peel the layers. Cardboard has 3 layers, and the one in the middle is that corrugated part, which I just is so cool and different, but it's obviously cardboard. It's highly recognizable. And it's just a fun material that I've yet to tire of. In my cardboard collage series, I played with, the idea of trying to elevate this ordinary disposable material from its humble status. And I think that ties into this theme that I have in my life, justice and equity, or the lack thereof, is a theme that keeps popping up in my life. I hate seeing unfairness and inequities playing out around me. And I mean, I don't usually psychoanalyze my work, but there's something about taking this lowly material and transforming it into, not only something beautiful, but art. Like, you are now art. nobody can treat you bad now. Like every dog has his day.
So so as you said earlier, you're very prolific. You're very prolific. And I'm
Yeah.
kind of curious, like, where does that drive to keep creating come from? Like, do you ever just stop and be like, I've done enough, I need to rest?
I just one thing I never run out of. I always have ideas. I'm
Hmm.
always inspired by something. Like I have not gone through. I should knock on wood. I haven't gone through like a dry spell for inspiration in a few years now. I'm like I can't remember the last time I've been like, oh, I don't know what to do next. Like yeah, I don't know. I'm like a little idea factory, and I can't seem to like keep up with that. Like I can't create fast enough.
I think it's because you look at the world as like anything you look at in your day-to-day life can become art. And I think it's
Mhm.
that mentality that you have that is very different from other people who kind of, are maybe just using paints or they're maybe just using charcoal or whatever. Like that's just their quote unquote artistic medium. Because you look at the world very differently and you kind of see everything as art and everything can become art. I think that's the reason you have so many ideas. And that's the reason that, like even something just simple as like taking a walk will inspire you to create a whole new series, most likely. Like the shape of like the trees or like the way leaves crunch on the ground or something. I bet that will probably inspire you to create a whole different series.
Well, it's funny you say that because I have been thinking about roots a lot.
Yeah,
There was an article or study, I forget, it came out a while back about how trees actually communicate through their root
yeah.
systems. Yeah, I mean, which is like crazy, right? And that they share nutrients and they act in this communal way and take care of one another. And I it just blew my mind. And so I've been thinking about that and roots. Like it's still percolating, but it's in the back of my head. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be doing something with that.
That's so cool. Like this is the thing. I think that's the kind of the best way to be because like you're absorbing the world and using that within your art. Like your art is a part of you, and then you're also within your work. Like it's fascinating to see. And I think the thing is, because I was on your website, obviously looking at the different series you've done, and you've done a lot of different series, and I was like, what do I want to talk about? And I was a bit like all of them, but not all of them. But it's interesting just because you've done a lot of different things. And I want to talk about the winter collection, which is really like visually. I think this is probably one of my favorite series of yours because visually it's very blue. Blue is a theme in your work that I've noticed, and I absolutely love that because it's my favorite color, and not just that. Like for me, like blue is the thread that runs through almost all of your series. I don't know if
Yeah.
was that intentional, or is this just that's just the way it goes?
Um, no, in fact, and it's funny because I mean, I know blue's my favorite color and, but I didn't really think about that. And then our mutual friend, Lori Bennett
Of
Levy,
course.
was giving me feedback on my website once. And she said, well, your color story, I mean, you should have blues. Blue's your color. And I thought, oh, well, and I don't know. It was just weird. I thought, well, yeah, I didn't just, it never occurred to me. I was like, really? Yeah. So, yeah, it's interesting to always have that pointed out because it's not something I think of. Yeah. Anyway, but, yeah, last October, I was prepping some bags to use in some collages, and I was using a lot of dark blues and salt. And using salt resist is a technique that I learned while actually I was teaching preschoolers,
Oh wow.
where you sprinkle salt on wet watercolor or acrylic paint, and the salt absorbs the liquid, leaving these little kind of flowery marks. And then I would put a whitewash over the dried salt, and the result looked like snow or ice crystals forming on a window. And it
Oh.
just kind of reminded me of cold, snowy days when I lived on the East Coast when I was young. And I've always been really affected by the weather. So I thought, oh, a series that feels like winter would be interesting. And that series only had 15 pieces in it, which, isn't a lot for me, but I wanted to keep it small so that I could maybe come back to it later on if I wanted. And actually I was just starting to think about like possibly doing a spring series.
Yes.
So
Yeah, 'cause that was one of my questions was like, would you do it for other seasons? Because I feel like it's always interesting to see something like the weather that's very kind of like it's not particularly tangible, but creating imagery that reflects something that we don't really see, if that makes sense, that we only feel.
right. And the seasons, I mean, I'm hyper aware of the seasons because in my tree planting,
Of course.
there's a sequence of events that, are happening. And so I'm always, kind of keenly aware of like, oh, okay, it's the beginning of winter. We need to be doing this. And so yeah, I kind of like the idea of that because the seasons do kind of represent a time and things that are going to happen to me. So yeah, it's something I'd like to explore more.
Yeah, because I think also the interesting thing about that is that like seasons kind of always mark a certain time. Like everyone has like a preference for a certain season, and everyone has like a relatability to certain kind of types of weather or certain kind of types of place. And I feel like weather is very universal in the sense of like, as much as we all moan about, like particularly here in England, as much as we moan about the weather, like it brings people together. Like it's something to talk about. It's something that we bond over. And I'm kind of wondering like if that could be or should be more present in your work because I think it would be very interesting. I think the idea of like it's interesting for me because just having spoken to you now, it's like there are a lot of different threads to your work, like cycles and the weather and nature and kind of just like day-to-day life, the quotidian like life, the fact that you're just kind of existing, that kind of really crop up in your work in terms of like, it's about recycling, it's about renewability, it's about kind of just there's so many different threads, ironically threads as well, because that appears in your work also. So it's like there's so many different threads. There's so many different kind of little like niches and genres and different elements you could add or take away from your work. And it kind of like I would love to see you. I tell you what I would love to see you do. Now I'm thinking about it. I would love to see you do like maybe like a mini collaborative series of like maybe say 20 pieces, which you collaborate with a different artist and you create something and have like completely different artists. Because I guarantee, no matter what medium or materials they use, there's something that you'll be able to bring to it that'll be completely different, but still essentially you, because you have your hand in many pies. But then it's always very interesting to look at, and it's always like I don't know, like it works so well. I don't know if that makes any sense. What I've just made any sense, but I don't know. Something like that would be really interesting. I think for you to do some kind of collaborative project,
Mm-hmm.
just to challenge yourself, but also just to see how your work can emerge with other people's as well. Like I don't know, like there's something interesting about that. I think you have a lot of skills and a lot of just really interesting, strange techniques that I think people could really learn about. That would be really interesting to learn about.
I actually did a collaboration. Was it this summer, in the spring
Wow.
or summer, with she's an abstract painter, Crystal Michelson. She's amazing. And I wanted to collaborate with her because she is really just like loose and gestural and beautiful marks. And I tend to be a little more rigid.
Hmm.
In my work, I always kind of revert to like, lines and geometric angles and she's kind of the opposite of that. And she has worked on used drop cloths before too. And so that's why I was like, you know what? I've been wanting to do a lot of drop cloth work. And so we collaborated on a series of drop cloth collages.
Wow.
And it was really fun. Like she kind of got me to loosen up a bit and it was great. Like I loved working with somebody who kind of, we have some of the same techniques, collage, etc., but her style is just very different from mine. And it was really fun. I learned a lot.
So I've got two questions for you that I just found from that. So the first is like, what is your favorite technique to use?
It's funny because in art school, I considered myself a painter, but now I've been getting really into collage. And when I was in school, collage was kind of looked down upon. It was considered craft. And so I didn't do a lot of it then because I thought there was kind of a stigma attached to collage and getting crafty. Now that has changed. That's another like just how things are evolving. It now is a high art form. And I I love layering. I love using different techniques, paint, some printmaking, cyanotype. I kind of just use it all.
Like, I'm very impressed because I always feel like, how do you have the time to do all that? Because that's the thing, because it's not just like, you're not just like, oh, I'll just try this, so it might look nice. It's like each of these processes take time to learn and to master, and also then to put together and know if it's going to go well, and then not know if it's going to go well. And there's just so much trial and error.
There
That's
is.
what really impresses me. I think that's what's interesting. So actually, this is not going in any kind of order that I planned. That's fine. But like, I'm kind of curious in terms of like, how do you know when a piece of work is finished then? Because you could technically keep creating the same piece, like keep adding to the work.
Hmm. I would say like about 95% of the time, I just know. I just know when it's done. Like that just feeling in your bones, like that's a wrap. This guy's done. Every now and then, I won't be sure. I've had this diptych up in my studio for the last few months, and I thought it was done, but there was always something that's just like that's been bugging me. And I just decided last week, I was like, I'm painting over this thing. I'm going back in. I'm going back in.
Fair enough.
And so, but yeah, there was just something nagging at me. And that's when I just like, okay, just go back in and see what you can do. Because if you're still questioning, yeah, it's not done.
Like, how can I phrase this question? It's like, so when you finish a piece of work, is it a case of like, cool, it's done, it's forgotten about, you put it to the side? Or does it always stay in your mind whilst you're creating another piece?
If it's finished, if I really feel like it's finished, I don't think about it anymore.
Oh.
Yeah, it's kind of like out of my mind and I'm on to the next one. And then if it's finished and I love it. Like there's a piece that I have in my studio right now that I just had framed and I keep going over and admiring it. I'm like, oh, you are good. I'm like, I love you. And I don't always feel, I don't feel like that about every single piece.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's just kind of funny. If it's a piece that you just absolutely love, maybe it stays and lingers. But otherwise, if piece is done, yeah, I kind of just put it off to the side and move on to the
So,
next.
so I think that's absolutely wonderful that you actually have a piece of your own work framed in your studio. I think that's absolutely wonderful because I feel like you kind of set yourself a standard, or at least you kind of have like something you're proud of that you've created. And I feel like we don't really often consider being proud of what we create because, maybe a lot of people create for other people or they feel like, as you said earlier, it needs to be marketable or whatever. But like just being able to stand back objectively and look at your own work and be like, I actually really like this. And that's actually quite rare for a lot of artists. But I feel like everyone's really trying to, well, not everyone, but a lot of people are trying to create work that is mass appealing, that is commercial, that is going to sell, that is, something beyond themselves. But think, the fact that you have your own work framed in your studio, I think that's absolutely wonderful. I think more artists should really do stuff like that.
Yeah, and and I've been in that space where I was trying to create art that was more sellable, right? There was a time when I was working with some interior decorators who, I would create something and then they would say, yo, but can you do something like that, but now in like pink and orange or in this color way or whatever. And because my first job out of college, I was a graphic designer, even though
Oh,
I
wow.
hated it. I hated it.
Wow.
But, it was a good way to learn, Photoshop and Illustrator. But
Oh,
other
yeah.
than that, it was not, I wasn't good at it. Anyway, when these designers would ask for, something in a certain colorway or, this or that or whatever, I kind of thought about like when I was a graphic designer, like, oh, I feel like a hired gun. You know what I
Mm.
mean? I'm kind of being told like, here, do this. And I did it, blah, but it didn't feel, it wasn't a fit because it's not authentic, you know? Like you can be hired to do something and that's fine and good. And it's a way to make a living. But
Yeah.
as a fine artist, that's hard. After a while, I think you'll get to a place where you're like, ugh, this just, I don't know. I can't, this isn't sustainable.
Yeah, I think that's actually a very good point because I feel like you want to create, like that's what you want to do. You don't want to be told. And I think they're very different things. Like to fit, like it's like illustrators. It's like having a client and having a brief is fine. Like there's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, a lot of artists and illustrators do that perfectly well, but it's not for everybody because some of the people just want to be able to create without having the limitations of like, oh, this is wrong, or we want me to change that, or because I feel like, you feel removed from your own work. And it's like you're the one creating it, you're the one putting your name to it. You want to make sure that whatever you're putting out into the world, you're happy to have your name attached to.
Right.
And I think a lot of
Right.
client works can sometimes, obviously, unless someone is very good and it's work that you're going to put in your portfolio, I think a lot of the times maybe, it's not necessarily helpful to you in the way like your own experimentations and your own ideas and thoughts would be maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think at some point, yeah, your work really you had to find that thing that's really about you or what you care deeply, and I kind of go back to when I finally was able to like marry my environmental activism and ideas with my artwork. That's when it really became meaningful to me and became sort of an endless source of inspiration for me. I mean, because I know my work, I don't feel like I'm doing anything groundbreaking, like it's, especially like with cardboard. I feel like it's all, a lot has been done before. I'm not the first person to work with cardboard. I'm certainly not like some of the like insane artists who are doing some things with cardboard, like Chris Gilmore or Monami Ono. They're doing exquisite things
Mm.
out of cardboard. I'm not doing that, but what I am doing works for me and is telling the story that I want to tell.
Yes. But also the great thing about that is that it's because of your upbringing and the way your perspective is on the world is why you create the work you create. So therefore, like the fact you're not doing exquisite cardboard art is probably better because it's authentic to you. It's from your experiences, it's from your own eyes, it's from the way you want to transfer yourself to the world. And I think that's kind of I think it is in some ways groundbreaking because as to me at least, it's made me feel like, wow, well actually, you know, what can it's like it makes me think like what can I use around me to create art or like what can I utilize in the world to create art and how do I look at the world differently now, thinking that anything could become art. So I think actually it is probably more impactful than you think. Because like looking through your website and stuff, I was like, this is fascinating. Reading your biography, which is very well written, I was like, this is such an interesting idea. Like the idea that your work not only looks good, but it actually means something. And it means something to the wider world, not just you. I think that's that's just fast to me, that's fascinating. Like I talk to a lot of artists who, their work is beautiful. I have the privilege of talking to well, actually anybody I talk to isn't a great artist. So I have the privilege of talking to many great people, but it's always nice to find somebody like yourself whose art seems to be just that little bit more selfless. I think you're not creating something aesthetically beautiful to create something aesthetically beautiful. You're creating something that actually means something to isolate really to everybody. Your work is very universal. I don't know if you ever think about that. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I don't know.
Um, I don't. Because I mean, I always come back to, art is so subjective.
Hmm.
And it's funny, one thing about doing art fairs, I have found that I can never predict what people are going to be drawn to.
Hmm.
When I love a piece, like a piece I like this is it. This is the showstopper. No, I'm always wrong. So I have no idea what people are drawn to. And yeah, it's different for everyone. And so yeah, I don't really concern myself too much with that stuff.
I'm actually quite curious though, like, do you ever feel like your work is too diverse?
Mm, too diverse. No, I would think, if anything, I probably have the opposite problem of that. I think, like, are people just going to get tired of seeing paper bags and cardboard all the time? Like, am I going to, like, is this played out? Although for me, I'm not tiring of it. So I just keep going with it. But I do think sometimes, like, are people going to look at this and just be like, okay, those are bags. Those are, I showed my spouse a new piece I'm working on in my studio a couple of weeks ago. It's this large scale, like monochromatic cardboard collage that I thought was really cool. I love it. And I'm showing it this. And I mean, well, let me preface this by saying he is a business person. He's not an artist by
Hmm.
any means, but he has a good eye. And he started collecting art way before I knew him. So I knew, I trust him. But he looked at it and he said, well, it's cardboard. And I was like, oh, you don't get it. So, so that's always my fear, that people are going to look at it and just be like, well, it's just cardboard though, like, and that goes back into that whole like value, challenging your idea of what's valuable, what's beautiful, etc. So,
Well,
yeah.
I think that to answer that question, you have to ask yourself another question, which is like, do you create work for yourself or for other people? Because I feel like the answer to that question will lead you to whether people are going to get bored of your work or not. Because if you're creating for yourself, as you said, you're not tired of it. So create as much as you want. You're not tired of it. You're the one creating it.
Yep.
It's your life and your time you're giving to it. Like, this is the thing. Like, we forget that art is not, as I say to everyone, I say this all the time, art is not a let's just do this on a Sunday because we have a few hours. Art is a dedication of time. Like, everything you do regards to your art practice is a documentation of your time, of your life. Like, at the end of your life, your art will remain where you will not. So it's like you have to remember, like, yes, you might think people are tiring of it, and yes, people might be bored of it. But if you're not bored of it as the artist, then absolutely keep creating it because it's making you fulfilled. And that's what's really the most important thing, in my opinion. But
Right.
I'm just some random guy from England, so I don't know anything. But you know, I kind of feel like I don't know, like there's just so many people that I meet that are like very worried about audience and about like, oh, what do people think and what is going to be good? And it's like, what do you think? And what do you think is good? Because nobody's asking you to do this. Nobody's like, I think maybe this is very cynical because I'm a very cynical person. Um, and it's so the way I often think of like the flying fruit bowl is that like nobody asked for it. So if anybody likes it, that's a bonus. I feel the same
Mhm.
with creativity. Like nobody asked you to create work. So if people enjoy it and people appreciate it, that's just a bonus. Anything you do is a bonus because nobody asked you. If that makes sense, that might sound very cynical, but I'm just a bit like, we kind of get very tied up in what we think other people want, and we don't really ask ourselves what we want. And I think as an artist, you have to, because at the end of the day, you don't want to get to like, 20 years down the line trying to please other people, only to realize you've wasted your life because you haven't done anything you liked. You know, it's very easy to be done.
I'm glad I kind of got that out of my system
Mm.
early, because early on in my career, yeah, I thought like, okay, I'm a commercial artist. I need to sell art. So I was marketing my art to, designers, people who were placing art in homes, which I remember I had a college professor who called that living room art, and he scoffed at it. You are not creating living room art, like, kind of drilled that into our heads. And then I kind of became a living room art, artist, I think, there for a minute. And but for me, it wasn't sustainable. I couldn't, I, there was no longevity in that for me. I mean, literally after a while, I just thought like, I'm not inspired by this. I can't do it anymore. And so it didn't last long. And then when I started creating just whatever I wanted, luckily I found, yeah, I think there is a market for it. And I think it's an emerging market. I think the whole idea of sustainable art that is made in a way that really takes into account materials and toxicity and waste created, etc. I think is going to gain prominence. It's going to be a thing. I'm banking on it, and for me, it's. I mean, the part of the fun is finding new ways to treat these materials that I use and to push their boundaries. And, I haven't exhausted that yet. So yeah, I'm going to keep going. Not too concerned with the people who say, that's just cardboard. Even if I am one.
But I also think the interesting thing is that particularly nowadays, because we're obviously in like the middle of a living crisis, I think that's also going to impact the way people choose their materials and consider the way they create work. And I think it's kind of interesting because with somebody like yourself, like, yeah, okay, the cost of living is going to impact you, obviously, but like your artwork, it might not impact that much because you can still create from the materials you use. It's not like you have to go out and pay loads of money for more materials.
Right. Well, also as somebody I spend my weekends out planting trees. I have a reforestation project that I've been doing for the last, almost 10 years. I don't want my art to contribute to, chopping down even one tree. Like no trees will be sacrificed for me to make my art. So it's kind of my starting point.
But just the amount of knowledge you must have in just different aspects of creativity is pretty insane.
Yeah, a little something I don't talk about very often, but for a hot minute, I was an actress.
Really?
Yes. In between art school and grad school. Yeah, I was an actress and I had a clothing line. So I was in fashion for a while. Yeah, I've always loved to sew. I grew up sewing, and I always, loved theater and stuff. So when I came out to Los Angeles, I came out, for grad school and stuff. I kind of dabbled in being an actress. So I love the arts. I love it all. I love fashion, everything.
The thread that I would find in that then, I feel like is very informative work is the idea of transformation. That would be what's kind of like the thread in your life then. Because, acting and fashion, they're both ways of transforming. And also your work is a way of transforming regular stuff into different things. So maybe transformation is just like the key theme in your life.
Transformation, escapism. I don't know. It's, there's a little of everything in there, right?
That's really fascinating. That's absolutely fascinating. That's kind of interesting. It's very interesting. It's amazing what you learn about people when you talk to them. So earlier you were saying about style, because you collaborated and you said that your style is very different from the other artist's style. And I'm kind of curious, like, how would you describe your style?
I would say it's very rigid. And that's something I'm always kind of battling with. I'm trying to be looser in my style, a little more, I don't know, gestural or flowing. I don't know. I just feel like I will do something. I'll be like, okay, I'm going to loosen up here. And then it always reverts to hard lines, grids, angle. Like, I don't know. It's just, I can't help myself. So yeah, I don't know.
Maybe it's because you, as you said, you're a control freak. You just like things being a certain way.
Yeah. And especially as an artist, you think that all great art will eventually be discovered, but that's not the case. So you feel like you're almost not in control of your destiny, which isn't a good feeling. And so maybe, yeah, that's where that theme is coming. Yeah, coming through in my work, which is always popping up in my life.
But then also is, I guess, also part of the reason would be just so that you have a visual kind of reference for your work. Because you use so many different materials, your work could look extremely different every single time you create it. So you want some kind of defining factor in your work, some kind of insignia, and like hard lines and edges and grids might be like your way of making sure people recognize your work. Because to be honest, it could look completely different from project to project, so that people
Mhm.
might not recognize it's yours unless you put it on your website and people see it. And actually, how important it is that there context to your work when it's seen, like, outside of your website? And also, like, do you want it to be recognizable as yours?
Yeah, and I've actually always wondered that. I had somebody tell me yesterday, like, "Oh, I love when I see your work pop up on my Instagram feed because I know immediately it's yours." And I thought, "Really? Oh, well, that's good to hear because I do wonder about that.
Hmm.
As you look at your body of work in its, entirety, is there that through line, that your signature style or what have you?" And so I do wonder about that because I do work with a lot of different materials. I started working on linen not too long ago. The garment district in Los Angeles, we have a big fashion district here, and a lot of textiles end up in landfill every year because fashion designers, especially if they create a textile, they don't want other fashion designers to use it. So they will
Yeah.
throw it away. So tens of thousands of yardage lands in landfill every year. So there was a designer that made these gorgeous custom dyed linens in all these gorgeous pastel colors, and they were going to throw them away. And I said, "Can I have them?"
Yeah.
Like, "Can I have them? I promise I won't, cut a blazer, trousers out of them. I'm going to use them to paint on." And so they did. I got, probably about 50 yards of all these different
Wow.
color linen. I've never painted on linen before. And I found it's really hard. It's really hard to work with because paint and liquid just drops right through it because linen is a looser weave. But just trying to experiment on that and yet still trying to have it, look like me and be recognizable as my work. I thought was a challenge, and I don't think, I don't know if I was successful, but I mean, it was definitely fun. But it just also, I will never stop experimenting. I'll try new materials and try something new, and sometimes I don't know.
I think that's insane if people just throw like fabric away because
Oh,
it's so expensive to buy in the first place.
it's it's the fashion industry's dirty little secret that is now coming to light that there is so much waste,
So I
and
just,
they're having their reckoning. I think like right
yeah,
now, a lot of it is
yeah.
now being talked about. I do believe the art world will be next.
Oh, okay.
I think it's coming. I think it is coming about like, hey, let's really take a look at the the materials, the waste, the everything. Yeah.
Perhaps, but I just feel like, particularly with like textiles, like you could do so much with that. Like,
I know.
why would you like just that, like to me personally, this is just me being, rambling, but like, why if you have the accessibility to give something to somebody that couldn't access that, who then, because if you got the material and they were like, oh no, don't make a blazer, it's like, but you can make the best blazer ever. You could have the option or the opportunity to create something that's beautiful that you would never have the opportunity to create. Why should that be taken away from you just because somebody wants to throw it away to appease their own ego? That just seems like such a waste because like you could give that fabric to the next, like budding fashion designers who need to practice or who want to create. They're just, it kind of makes me honestly a bit annoyed because it's about accessibility. It's not everybody is afforded the same access to materials, and throwing stuff away that people could use. Like, look at yourself, you could use that to create art. And it's not
Right.
because you're in it to make the most money out of it, it's because it allows you to create other opportunities for yourself.
Right.
I just, that stuff like that just really, honestly, really irks me. It's just like we have
Hmm.
enough people in the world who don't have access to things. Why are we then restricting them further by just being selfish? Particularly like the fashion industry where it's already very like elitist. It's a bit, I don't know. There's something about that really bugs me. I'm going to start rambling because I'll get myself into trouble. But
No,
I
it's
don't know.
elitist, and there's a lot of proprietary use of certain fabrics and custom textiles. So I understand, like, if you took the time to custom dye, this pink is your pink of the season. I get that you don't want another designer to use. However, I mean, and they were perfectly like willing to give it to me, knowing, I was an artist and I wasn't going to, create a fashion line from it. But, um, it, I think they also, just don't take the time to be like, oh, let's see who could use this.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah.
yeah.
It just makes you think of like all the people who are missing out because they could have used that and that could have gone towards, starting somebody's career at the end of the day.
For sure. Because I know when I had my clothing line 17 years ago, it was a while ago.
Wow.
All of my leftover textiles I donated to a women's shelter that
Yeah.
makes, they would make something out of them to sell at their
Yeah.
little
Like
store.
like that's like this the thing, like, and I guess as your work proves, like everything can be reused, everything has a value, but it's
Mhm.
just remembering that and appreciating that and not just passing on to the next person who can create something completely amazing out of it. I
Right.
don't know, stuff like that just really bugs me because it's just like you're taking away access to things. And you're right, if it's like a certain, custom dye color of the season, I get that. But at the same time, that can still be used. It doesn't have to be for fashion, it can be used for something else. So listen,
Yeah.
somebody might just want to paper their walls with it. You just don't know, honestly.
See, I think equity is a theme in your life too.
Hmm. Maybe it is. Maybe I'm just a bit like, I don't know. I'm just, the stuff like that really frustrates me because I just look at it like, there are so many people who are already going without. Why are we
Yeah.
actively allowing more people to go without? It's not fair. I guess unfairness is also not I don't like, especially
Yeah.
when it comes to like working environments. I'm not a fan of unfairness. I'm not a fan of, certain people having to do more work than others, getting paid the same wage, which is a definitely a theme in my life. But that's the completely different topic of conversation. But even just stuff like, I guess that when it comes back to art, even stuff like art, like I guess part of the reason that I do the Fine Fruit Bowl is to bring attention to people because we live in a society that is very much like pay to play. Like, oh, you want a feature, you've got to pay me money, or like, oh, I will, you have to pay me for this or that. So I kind of
Right.
feel like I don't know stuff like I don't know, just I don't know. There's a lot of threads and reasons I do the things I do, but I think just not giving people access who really could honestly really build a career off that, or just even just spark the initial interest. Because, like we said earlier, like everybody's journey is so different. The start of your journey is so important, but everyone doesn't have the same access or the same, just the same starting point. And I think
Mhm.
you don't have to be 19 years old and to be an artist. You can be an artist at any point in your life. So all you need is the ability and I think as an artist, all you need is time, space, and money. They're the three things you need as an artist. Finding
Right.
them in conjunction is extremely hard. But I think if you're lucky enough to have all of those things in abundance, then I think you can have a very good art career. And I just feel like accessibility is super important. Anyway, I'm going to end that rumble there because otherwise I'll be going on for another hour about it. But I just stuff like that just really bugs me. It rubs me the wrong way because it's just not fair, and it's not even just not being fair. It's just it can do a lot of damage for like the longevity of art in a way. But anyway, move on from this. 'Cause I'm going to ramble otherwise. Sorry, that was
No,
a whole
I'm
tangent.
totally with you. I'm totally with you. Inequity and waste. It's like those are two things that just get under my skin.
Because, they say, obviously very cliched, one man's trash is another man's treasure, but like it's so true. Like it's so true. Particularly when like it comes to like mixed media, particularly when it comes to, everyday objects, particularly when it comes to like, reimagining the world. Like artists create. That's what they do. They don't necessarily buy, they don't necessarily source, they create. And I think,
Mhm.
just not giving people access to things that they could, I don't know. It doesn't sit right with me. But anyways, out of curiosity, what would you like to learn next? Do you have anything planned for like, oh, I'd love to learn this technique?
What do I want to learn next? It's funny because the pandemic and being on lockdown, that was like I made that into my time, like, okay, what's going to be my project? Everyone was
Mm.
baking bread and all that stuff. And I was like, okay, I did try it and I'm not a baker. So I really wanted to learn how to make paper. And so that was my big
Yes.
pandemic project, making paper. I turned my backyard into like a little paper mill, and it was super fun. Also, my kids were on Zoom school and they were
Mm.
printing out reams of paper.
Oh, yeah, of
I was
course.
pulling my hair out. I was like, oh my. So again, I was like, all right, we got to do something with this. So we researched how to make paper, and I learned how to make the little frame and decal and started making paper. And then I started painting on it. And now I'm collaging with it and making paper pulp sculptures. I don't have a lot of experience doing a lot of sculptural work. So I thought, that's kind of fun and different. Um, and then, after that, I wonder what I want to do next. I do want to start incorporating more sewing into my work because I do
Mm.
love to sew, but it's been a long time since I've kind of busted out my sewing machine and stuff. And yeah, I used to do a lot of stitch work, and I kind of want to start maybe incorporating that again. Um, I also like the look of more industrial treatment to to works of art, like putting in grommets and rivets, and I don't know, like to have a more industrial hard feel. I thought, that's also something I want to experiment with, like just kind of more like the mechanics of putting together art and different ways to fasten and stuff like that, rather than using, glue or thread, just kind of some non-traditional ways to, adhere.
That's fascinating. And this idea of like it's going to be so textured, like that's so interesting. It'll be like really layered and textured. But I also kind of feel like, and this is a question for later on, but I'm going to ask you now because it just feels right to ask. But like, do you think that your work translates well online? Because your work is very textured.
Not as well as I would like, to be
Hmm.
honest. It's very textured, and because it's paper and paper bags and cardboard, once you get it wet, it takes on a whole other physicality. I mean, it's ripply, doesn't lay flat anymore. So, and I try my best to, kind of flatten things out, putting books all over, like
Yeah.
just trying to weight it down. And then, but, when you photograph it, every little curve shows. And sometimes that bothers me. And I think, oh, it's probably not photographing as well as I would like. But that's more probably about my photography skills than anything else. Um,
I was going to say with that, you'd have to experiment with the lighting and figure out like where the best lighting is going to be to like to because like did you want to show the texture? Did you want to make it look flat? Like the way you place the lighting would really have a huge impact on the final image. I'm a photographer, I'm aware of these things, but it's
right.
kind of like you know it's And I think some stuff like for photographing art, I think we don't talk about. That's actually quite hard to do.
Yeah, it is.
To get it looking like how you want it to look like, because a photograph isn't the actual piece of work. It's just a representation of the piece of work. And because you
Right.
want people to buy that work, it's hard for them to gauge like what is this going to look like in real life, because colors are always different and textures are always different. And your work is not two-dimensional, it's three-dimensional.
Right. Yeah. So I think my work probably presents better in person, but what are you gonna do?
I feel like I would love to see your work in person. I think it'd be so interesting. Like it'd be fascinating to see.
People are always surprised by the scale sometimes, like some pieces that are very small as opposed to some that are really quite large. And online, I mean, unless you look at, the
The
dimensions,
dimensions, yeah. But even
can't,
then, you won't necessarily get a scope of it, because how many people necessarily know how wide a meter really is? Like,
right.
like
So,
I think it's kind of interesting. Like I work in a hardware store, funnily enough, and I work on a timber saw, so like stuff like measurements, like I understand a meter wide, what that looks like roughly. But I feel
mhm,
like it's hard for people to gauge scale, particularly online, because everything looks the same size.
right.
And when people say mini, do they mean like small or do they mean like tiny? It's kind of interesting. Um,
Right.
but kind of actually, not a question I put on here, but now I'm thinking about it, like what kind of scale do you prefer working with? And like how do you choose the scale of the work?
I don't really choose the scale. I just, as I'm working on a collage and I'm kind of mapping it out, it, it sort of chooses itself. But probably, I do like to work a little larger. So, probably like almost a meter high by, I don't know what about 3/4 of a meter is, but I
So
usually
75 centimeters.
like portrait. I,
Yeah.
I don't do a lot of landscape orientation,
Oh.
and yeah, pretty big, pretty big. But then, especially with paper pieces, you have to take into account like, okay, well, this is going to probably need to be framed, and now it's getting a little large to be framed. So stuff like little things like that, just about the kind of commercial viability, do have to
Mm.
kind of think about a bit for shipping, stuff like that. It's some,
Yes. Oh yeah. Also because fragile as well.
So there's a lot to think about, but most of my sales lately have been, well, even on my website, usually they're local sales. So people will
Mm.
have the option to come pick up or
That's
I
cool.
deliver. Yeah. And I've been doing art fairs for the last couple of years and open studio events. I do a lot of sales just directly out of my studio. So people are able to kind of have opportunities, come see things in person. Yeah.
That's actually a really good business model though, because you also get to know these people because they're local to you as
Yeah.
well. And like establish, because the thing is about art is that like to sell art, you have to establish a relationship with the buyer. Like, yes, okay, people can just come along randomly and purchase stuff, but more often than not, they're interested in you as well as your work.
Right.
So I kind of feel
Right.
like one thing that we forget very much is that art is just more than the transaction of somebody's bought a piece of work. It's like they're investing in you as a person as well as you as an artist. I think the fact that they can come to your studio, like how amazing is that? Like to be able to go to your studio, to actually meet you, for you to give them your time, to have a look around, to be in your presence with the work, and then be able to buy a piece of work. Because you're not buying just the work, you're buying the experience. Like that's actually really interesting, actually.
Yeah. And right now in the last year, I've gotten into more grant writing. And I wrote a grant a few months ago to the city that I work in, and they funded my grant.
Wow.
And it's to sponsor open studio events at my studio space. And
That's
so
incredible.
I know I
That's absolutely incredible.
was so happy. I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, you're actually going to pay me to put on these events. I mean, it's a lot of work. We actually have our first event this Saturday night.
Oh, that's
And
so interesting.
yeah, so it's about 20 plus artists in my studio space. It's actually really cool. We're in an old airplane hangar at the Santa Monica Airport in California. And so it's this big, huge airplane hangar that has been subdivided into about 30 artist studios. And we have a big gallery in the center. And so we're having, big like holiday open house, open studios, and, an opportunity to come and meet the artists, get a peek into their art practice, and, buy art directly from the artists, which is pretty cool.
I think that's absolutely wonderful that you're giving back, because it's not just about you and you creating work and being able to sell it. It's you being like, let's further the community. Let's further buying art. Let's further, the creative process. And I absolutely have so much respect for that. I have so much respect for that, because I think it's just a wonderful thing to do, because you don't have to.
Well, coming out of the pandemic, I mean, we lost about, half of the artists in my studio space just stopped coming in and never kind of came back. I mean, they still have their studio spaces, but they just haven't kind of been able to get back in and just start creating again. And the building has been so quiet for the last 2 years that I thought, like, we got to do something to like kind of get things going again, get that sense of community, because it felt like a little ghost town in there. So that was the inspiration. Like, let's get a sense of community again, breathe some life into this building, get reacquainted, get, kind of emerge from this post-COVID era. COVID's not over, but like, let's get back to work and to remind the community that we're here, because I feel like they kind of forgot about us a bit, and rightfully so.
Yeah, I think artists were definitely on the bottom of a lot of people's lists during the pandemic, to the point that they actually made, I remember reading, at least here in the UK, they made like the most important jobs and the least important jobs list for the pandemic, and artists were on the bottom, being like, we don't need artists. And it's a bit like, well, good luck trying that one, because imagine if we didn't have any artists. Also, how is that positive towards the art?
But at the same time, during the pandemic, online art sales broke records.
Exactly. So it's kind of like, okay, then, okay. Yeah. I don't know who wrote that exactly, but whoever wrote that clearly doesn't buy art.
Yeah, maybe has a little grudge against artists. I don't know.
No, but I don't know. I think it's kind of I do think, though, one thing that I thought was quite interesting is the kind of shift in the way that people thought about art, or became artists, or wanted to be creative, or because people had the time. We kind of take time for granted. Like, people need the space and time to create. I think because a lot of people had that space, I think it kind of made people realize, like, oh, actually, everybody does have a creative side. It's just finding the balance of working and creating, particularly if you work. It's kind of like people just need time to develop themselves. And I think we forget that very easily, because we're so caught up trying to make money and live and do adult stuff. So,
Well, that was one great thing about the pandemic. I mean, obviously a lot of bad.
Yeah, of
one
course.
good thing is, especially for artists, is that you got to create under the guise of, no one may see this. Like, this art I'm creating may never see the light of day. So I'm just going to go crazy and, create without any expectation. And that was really liberating, because I went nuts over the lockdown. There was nothing else to do. So I did take a few weeks off of my studio at the beginning, and then I was kind of the only one who went into the studio. I had the place to myself, so I worked almost every day, just going nuts.
It's kind of interesting, though, now when I think back, and particularly here in the UK, at least, because here in the UK, COVID is for the most part over, although it's having a bit of a resurgence at the minute, but it's for the most part over. Everyone's kind of like over it, which is a shame because it's not really over. It's never really over. But it's kind of weird to me because it's just like we'll never have that kind of time again. Like it's very rare that we'll ever have this kind of, or touch wood. It's very rare that we'll ever have this kind of time again to be able to do stuff in quite the same way and to have everybody to have like the world in the same boat as well. Like that's the interesting thing because
That was
everybody
what's so
had to adhere
fascinating.
to it. And it's like it doesn't matter how much money you have, it doesn't matter where you are from the world, it doesn't matter anything, any of your kind of background of politics, like everybody was in the same boat. I think that's probably the only time in my lifetime, especially, I think we'll ever see that happen.
Yeah, no, to have a collective worldwide experience at the exact same moment. I mean, yeah, it was kind of
Mm.
mind blowing
Mm.
that
I think,
we're all going through this at the same time.
yeah,
Not equally, for
yeah, of
sure.
course. Oh, of course, definitely not.
Yeah,
Definitely not if you're boarding private planes to different places in the world when no one's meant to travel. Of
right,
course. Or
right.
if you're stuck in a very nice hot country, whilst everybody else is saying, being able to not be able to eat because they can't move or leave the house, stuff like
Right.
that. Like, I agree, but I do think it's interesting that for that one fraction of the time in the, timeline of humanity, like everybody was kind of in the same boat relatively. Well, yeah,
Mhm.
relatively in the same boat. It's just, I don't know. I think in hindsight, I think the pandemic was actually a really fascinating time in
Mhm.
terms of just like history. I think the way that is going to be stable is we have, well, we now have a pre-COVID and post-COVID. Like it's kind of really redefined a lot of the way we think about life and the things we say. Because a lot of things in our everything's like post-COVID now, and it's I don't know. It's kind of
Right.
like I don't know in my lifetime if we've ever had anything that's quite substantial. I guess that's well,
Mhm.
actually, no, that's wrong. 9/11 was very substantial. There was a post 9/11 and a pre 9/11. But other than something such as 9/11, I don't think we've had necessarily. I guess here in the UK, one could argue the Queen's death, but I don't know that much about that. But it's kind of like there are certain key events in life that you're going to remember have changed the world, and I think the pandemic is definitely one of them. And it's weird because like in 20, 30 years, the kids then will have no idea of what it was like, which is bizarre.
I wonder, well, in a way, I hope not, but I don't know if that's true.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, so
Hopefully, yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's a good point. We
I
know
will.
it's yes,
Oh, I
continue.
was going to say, now, like in this like sort of post-COVID world, I am interested in seeing, like sort of how we emerge from it, like,
Mm.
and if there is attention to that transition and reflecting on what was and the reaction going forward, like if it is being considered, or if we're just like, okay, that's over, party on,
I think it depends on what you lost during the pandemic. I think that's really how it would affect people moving forward. So I think people who didn't really lose anything, I think they're just like, cool, okay, now we get back on with life. But I think for a lot of people who lost either whether it's loved ones, whether it's their job, whether it's their livelihood, whether it's just opportunities, for instance, I think they'll remember it in a very different way. And I think actually it's always really interesting to consider like actually wait, no, we're talking about the pandemic. I didn't even ask you about your grocery bag series, which was created during the pandemic, which is what I want to talk to you about. Um yeah, actually, could you talk about that series? Because you made it, yeah, because you made it during the pandemic.
Well, it's funny. So, grocery bags, I've played around with that idea of using them for years, but the meaning or their meaning evolved for me. The first time I used grocery bags, whatever, 13 years ago, they symbolized motherhood to me. I had my first
Hmm.
child. I was going to the market all the time, and I always saw other women with their kids there. And so it took on this meaning of like mom work, mom duties,
Yeah.
going to the market like every day. And I started, um, then I started using, the reusable cloth bags to take to the market. And so for about 10 years, I didn't have any paper bags in my house. And it wasn't until the pandemic, when the markets wouldn't allow you to bring your bags from home, that they, you know, required like, nope, we're putting everything in brown paper bags, like COVID can't live on that surface, or I don't know what their thought process was. And so I started amassing a lot of these bags. And, when Los Angeles first went on lockdown, I was so focused on getting my family prepared for that time that I didn't think about, bringing supplies home from my studio or anything. So, I saw all the bags stacking up and I thought, okay, now's the time to use those. And I started sketching on them with charcoal, and my kids and I started making like botanical inks and dyes, and I would paint with that. And so, that's kind of what kicked it all off officially. I'd played around with it before, but this was my first, like, I actually made a collection out of them.
That's fascinating though, because again, it comes back to just using what you have, not having to go out and get things and being like, oh, I have to buy this. It has to be, the best quality. It's like, let's use what we have. Let's just create to create, and I think there's something really wonderful about that sentiment. And I kind of can't stress like how important that is and how much the people should really be like thinking like that. Like, I think that's a really wonderful way that you are creating work in this way, like to make use of everything,
Well, yeah, I kind of did a deep dive on making botanical inks. And oh my gosh, like even just that, I had no idea that avocados, the avocado seed, the pit and the skins, the pit makes this gorgeous like pink color. I didn't know that. And the skins make this sort of salmony color. And it was like a whole new world that opened up. It was fascinating because I had the time to actually look into it and learn it, and it's really fun.
Like, would you ever teach workshops?
Because I taught for so long, and I thought I would teach longer, but I sort of, I saw my students creating, and I missed it. I was like, oh man, I wish I could just be taking art classes, and that's actually what inspired me to get back to my own art practice. So I don't think so. I mean, I will do like little things for, like school projects and stuff like that, usually involving, like my kids' school. And I've always taught an art class at, art night at school and stuff like that, and auction off paintings for their school fundraisers. But I don't think I'll be doing any classes or workshops.
Just because I feel like you have so much knowledge, like so much knowledge about so many different things. And I feel like you're the kind of person that like people, I feel like I say this in every interview, but like you're the kind of person that people need to really talk to, because like you have so much information that you can give to people, and you have so much value in the knowledge you have. And I think it's just fascinating. Like it's just so interesting because there's so many different things, and also there's things you want to learn. So it's not even like you're like, oh cool, I'm done. This is me. You're like, this is me continuing to do stuff. You're like a deep well of information. I don't know.
Oh wow. Thanks. I've always thought of myself as just sort of scattered and sort of dilettante, like what else can I do? Like right now I have, there was a construction site up the road, and they had like out in the front, just their big trash bin, right? Yeah. And had all these, when they demoed the building, just all the old wood and scrap metal, and there was just like this pile of like all this metal bits, screws and whatever, and I kind of took a handful and I took some stuff, and it has been raining for the last couple of weeks off and on, and I left it all outside, and all the metal has oxidized and it's rusting, and I had him under like this piece of paper, paper bag paper. And the rust has left this like pattern, this print on the paper, like a rust dye I've done rust dyeing a long time ago, but it's like it just kind of happened naturally. And I was just like, wow, that's cool. Maybe I gotta get back into rust dyeing. Like I'm just like all over the place. But yeah, like I was saying before, like I've never a shortage of inspiration and ideas. I have too much. Like
That's
my brain is just too fast.
that's so fascinating. But also I like the fact that a lot of your work stems from just trying stuff. And if it works, it's perfect. If it doesn't, it's perfect as well. You know, like I feel like experimentation is so much more important than we give it credit for. I really do. I really do. And I think your work definitely proves that, like for sure. Okay, so what is your kind of creative process like? And do you actually have any particular routines that help you focus on creating work?
Depending on the project. The last few years I've been doing more conceptual projects.
Hmm.
Mostly to, kind of highlight the more environmental aspects of my work. And so with those, I definitely start by writing, hashing out the idea. But my day-to-day process in my studio, I just dive in. I just work.
Wow.
I just go. I'm super impulsive. So I tend not to think first, which isn't always good. But for the art process, it seems to work.
Because, referring back to that YouTube video, the lone YouTube video that I know I'm not going to keep mentioning, but it was really, really interesting to watch though, because your space is not only really large, but like there are so many, it just made me realize how many different elements there is to your work and how much you do in
Is
the
that the
day-to-day
paper
work.
making one?
Yes,
The
that's
paper.
correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it's just like you have these huge drawers that you pulled out, and I was just like, this is insane. Like, and there's just so much detail and effort that goes into your work that I think isn't necessarily reflected when you look at it on your website necessarily, because it's just like you don't understand the layers, the time, the techniques, the processes. And
Yeah.
I'm kind of just like it. I don't know. There's something really interesting about seeing that process. And is that something you're planning to do more of in the future?
Um, yes, I'm actually been in the middle of documenting
Mm.
a lot more of my work. It was not something I had ever done before. And then a show that I had up earlier this year, the curator asked me to document the whole process. And I thought, wow, I've never done that before. And it was a really valuable, not only lesson, but experience. So it's something I definitely want to do more of because, yeah, like you said, when you don't see everything, like just the process and the trial and error. And I mean, there's a lot that goes into it.
I was just really, really, really blown away by just how much goes into it. And I was like, this is impressive. Like, that's the thing. Because particularly with like abstract art, because you look at it and you think, oh, I could do that. But you look at it and you're like, no, actually, you really couldn't do that. You think you can do that, but you really can't actually do that. And I think
Isn't that
that's really,
is that the definition of contemporary art? Like,
yeah, of
oh, I
course.
did that. Yeah, but you didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, it is actually. I like that. I like that a lot, actually. But no, it's kind of, I don't know, like, I think abstract art gets a lot of flack, and also, like, I'm not going to say that I'm not in that camp sometimes too, but like, it looks easy, or it looks like, oh, okay, it's just lines on a page. But it's more than just that. And I think that's kind of just being able to see your process. Honestly, for me, I looked at it and I was like, I have so many more questions to ask because of this. Like, there's just so much I want to know about because it's just, you're such a mystery as well. That's the thing. Like artists like yourself, because you don't have a lot of process images, you don't have a lot of interviews. You're such a mystery. So people like yourself, like I'm always intrigued to talk to because it's just like I don't know what you're going to say, or I don't know who you are. So let's scratch that surface and find out.
Yeah.
Always fun.
I think that's on purpose. Interviews
Yeah,
and stuff can make me
artists.
uncomfortable. So
Well, hopefully this isn't. Hopefully, but
no, this is nice. This is my conversation. So, but yeah,
but I think that's really funny. Just personally, I think that's very funny because, like, as an artist, you want your work to be seen and you want your work to be understood, but you don't really want to talk about it. It's kind of funny.
that's
It's
a
like a
great
funny,
paradox, right?
yeah, it's a very funny paradox. It's just a funny alignment of like everybody's quite introverted, but you kind of almost have to be extroverted as an artist. Don't always have to be, but you sometimes have to be. But anyways,
Especially now.
yeah.
I mean, don't you feel like the advent of social media, like it pays to have a big personality? And I feel like, I see what maybe I would call like Instagram famous artists, who really got their start on Instagram. It feels to me more like a brand. And God bless them, but I just, I don't like putting myself out there. So yeah, I don't think I could do that, but I mean, it probably would help.
Do you think that's a generational thing?
Yes.
Because now, only because you said that. No, only because you said that. I'm just thinking like maybe that's a generational thing because, yeah, because obviously a lot of the kids of today, that must be sound old when I'm not even that old, but like the kids of today, like they're very much just on social media constantly. Whereas like I grew up just before the advent of the internet was really a big thing. Like I remember the first day of YouTube. Like I was in school when YouTube was like the first day. So it's like for me, it's like seeing everybody be online 24/7 is just bizarre. It makes no sense to me. Like there is a life outside. So maybe that's really the kind of struggle, I think, for a lot of artists, trying to be more personal online. It's not because they don't want to be, they just don't know how to be. Because for them, that's not the quote unquote correct way to make art or to be an artist. Maybe.
Right.
I'm gonna be thinking about that now.
Yeah, and I mean that probably ties into just my feelings of social media in general. Yes, it's amazing to be connected with all these other artists and to be able to see what people are putting out there in the world in a way that we've never been able to do that. However, I don't spend a lot of time online. So, and that's just not what I want to do. But I see as a parent that kids want to spend more time online than they would actually with real life people. And I find that strange how that has shifted. I would much rather, kind of hang out with friends in person than be chatting with them on my phone.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's definitely interesting how times have changed, but it's like you have to kind of also adapt to those changes, but also being very stubborn in your own ways. It's like hugely paradoxical, and it's actually something I'm going to be thinking about a lot nowadays. Now that I'm like, that's actually quite interesting, right? So actually, that actually really segues very nicely into a question I have for you in the conclusion section, which is from a very good friend of mine called Ryan Dean Howes. I've mentioned him in probably every interview, and much to his annoyance. And we were talking ages ago about the idea of skill and personality. And we were saying, which is more important, the skill of the artist or the personality of the artist?
I think right now, I think 10 years ago, I would have said skill, of course. Today, I would say both. Because with social media being as prominent as it is, I think, and some of the artists who are doing really well, I mean, there is, like I said, sort of a brand. Their personality is almost just as prominent as their art is in their online presence. So I think it's they're like becoming equal. Granted, I mean, all of them are skilled artists, so that is a common denominator they all have. But I think, that their personalities being prevalent is helping and just as important. What do you think?
Yes, I say now. So now, as you were saying that, I was just thinking of like the kind of types of artists that I'm currently talking to, and actually, like I actually have noticed a huge difference in the way some people are and some people aren't. And one thing I always say is about like extroversion and introversion, and a lot of people I speak to are introverted. They don't really want to show themselves. But then every now and again, I'll see an artist or I meet an artist or I talk to an artist who's very extroverted. And I'm always kind of curious as to why that is. And now I'm thinking about it, it might be a generational thing. And also it's just yeah, I think the problem is that like nowadays, like everything has to, quote unquote, has to be a brand. I think that is a bit of a problem because it's all great being like, cool, I'm a brand. But if you don't know what you're doing and if you don't know what you want to do, you don't know what you want to settle on, creating a brand might not be a good idea because then you can't break out of that and do other things. You know, you don't want to tie yourself
Mhm.
down to like being, say, like a graphic designer and then realize, oh, actually, I want to create videos. I mean, and of course, you can be multidisciplinarian, nothing wrong with that. But I think the idea of branding is something that I'm very much thinking about just for myself as well and the fine fruit bowl and just all that fun stuff. But it's kind of like, it's the same with business though. It's like, at what point do you become a business as an artist? At what point do you become just an artist? Like, well, like where is that threshold? You know, I'm always kind of asking myself this as well. Because just like, at what point do you take a hobby or something you do for fun or something you enjoy, particularly if you're not doing it full time, where is that line between being a business and being like, you know, just a hobbyist? Like, is there even a line anymore? Because you can make money from anything nowadays, you know?
Yeah.
But that doesn't make you a business just because you make money from something.
Um, well, if that business, I mean, if you're really pulling in a certain,
Yeah,
income.
I guess that would be the threshold. The
But
amount you
I
make.
think, I mean, I remember somebody told me like 5 years ago, you know, well, you're a business. And I said, am I though? And they said, are you trying to sell your work? I said, yes. And they said, then you're a business.
Mm.
And so, and that was kind of weird. And I fought that for a bit because I just didn't like how it sounded.
Yeah,
But now I really do treat myself. I think it's just responsible to think of myself as a business because I have expenses, I have
yeah,
revenue, I have, it's like I keep a spreadsheet,
yeah,
like
of course.
I have to, you know, take care of business. So file taxes, all that stuff. So
Yeah,
yes, I am more organized like a business.
that's
So
fascinating. That's absolutely fascinating. And I think that's kind of, I think that's actually a really interesting shift in, I guess, generationally. Like, whereas in like, you'd be like, cool, I'm a business. Whereas a lot of artists nowadays, like, you know, popular Instagram artists, for instance, would be like, cool, I'm just making money. There's a big difference between just making money and being a business. And I don't know,
mm,
I think that's a fascinating mindset to have. And I feel like there's so much I want to ask you about that, which is not the time to go into now. I feel like having some kind of, I don't know, like kind of business, not a course or like a workshop or something, but I don't know, some kind of, I don't know, some kind of talk about business and the arts. I think that's needed. I think I need to do something with that because I feel like that's really needed. Um, but yeah, anyways, I'm just thinking about what other work can I create for myself in the future? Because I'm not doing enough.
that is interesting. You say that because I felt like over the pandemic, that was a whole new genre that popped up,
Hmm,
the business coach,
yeah,
right? All these uh, coaches that were, creating workshops on the business of art, how to market your art, this, that, how to get more
hmm,
gallery shows. And I, I saw it just kind of, it like ramped up out of nowhere, I felt. And so now that in itself is a business.
hmm, yeah. Actually, that's true. This is a problem that everything's a business. That's the issue.
Yeah.
You know, in a good and a bad way, but like that's the issue. And it kind of makes you, it kind of, I don't know about, well, you are a business, so it's probably silly to say to you, but like, I don't know if somebody like me, like, I don't know if I want to be a business, you know, I don't really know if that's something I want to do because being a business comes with the responsibilities and other kind of thresholds and expectations. And like, I don't know, sometimes being a business takes the fun out of what you do as well because it becomes about money and not everything needs to be about money. I think it's very, very hard. I feel like everyone should have one thing in their life that is not about money, in my opinion. But we'll see. We'll see what happens in the future. Um, right, here. So I have a question for you from the last artist I interviewed. And the last
Mhm.
artist I interviewed was a really, really, really cool photographer called Ben Childs. And his question for you was, how has your art changed your perspective of the world?
Um, I have found that whenever somebody has an emotional response to a piece of art, that's when they're sort of the most open about maybe changing their opinions or being influenced or just able to kind of hear a message more kind of openly. So that's kind of when I made the shift in my own work. Like, you can really change perceptions, educate, inform through your artwork. And so that's when I really started focusing on, my other passion in life, my tree planting, my environmental endeavors, and bringing that into my work as a way to sort of educate about those issues.
So I kind of wonder, like, do you think that art needs to have a meaning or have a purpose?
No, I don't. But as somebody who kind of gets bored easily, I've always needed a purpose, or else I just think like, okay, for me, okay, that's living room art that I'm creating. It doesn't have any meaning to me, to my soul, like I'm not bearing anything. So, but no, I mean, I've been collecting art since college, and I buy things that speak to me that I love. I don't really look for meaning in it. There's something about it I connect with. And, so I don't think that people have to like know exactly what I'm talking about and what I'm addressing. But for me as the creator, it needs to reflect my values in some way, or else, I mean, I have made art for myself that I just like, oh, I just love this. It's beautiful. I love the colors, blah, blah, blah. But right now where I'm at in my career, it has to reflect a bigger meaning for me.
That's so cool. I absolutely love that. And I have so much respect for that as well, though, because like, art can sometimes be very selfish and it can be very self-serving. So it's nice to see people create art that is like more universal, more thematic, more kind of like, let's engage in conversation. Let's talk about something. Let's, connect through this work. And I like that. I think that's really clever. Rather than being like, this is a beautiful image, admire it. That's nice. It's nice to see.
Right. And you know what? And I think, a few years ago, like maybe even when I was in art school, I feel like art and nature have a lot of parallels. They both elicit emotional responses or, a sensory experience. But, and maybe we're to be admired or enjoyed. You go out in nature to be, to admire the scenery. You look at a piece of art, or buy a piece of art for your enjoyment. And now it's sort of more kind of gone into that like purpose driven art, that's standing for something bigger, kind of bigger ideas.
Yeah, actually, that makes me wonder, like, what do you think the future of the art? Well, actually, no, let me ask you that in a second because I want to ask you before that. Do you have a question for the next artist I interview?
It's a lot of things that I've been thinking about, and I think you're about to ask it about the future of art
Yeah.
and how just like Web3 and AI and, how is that going to affect fine artists, traditional fine artists, people who are still, manually making art and using, traditional materials. If the future of art is more internet based, where and how can you incorporate yourself into that?
Oh, that's a very good question. That's a very good
And
question.
one that I can't even answer. I have no idea, but I'd like to hear somebody else's answer.
Based where and how are you going to put it into your work?
Yeah, or where do we fit into that? Ooh.
So where do you think the future of the art is heading?
I do think it is still going to move into that more sort of purpose-driven direction. You know, I think the younger generation, the artists that are coming up, are much more engaged in social justice issues, more so than I think any generation that came before them. And they're taking on kind of bigger ideas, kind of more macro. You know, it's not necessarily just about, you know, like how when I was in art school, it was all about like me, my world, my experiences. It's now this like much larger context of the world and where I fit into that. So, which I think is exciting. I like that. Bigger ideas.
That's fascinating. I think it's going to be more community driven, I think. For better or for worse, actually, thinking about like the whole Lens app and all the controversies surrounding stuff like AI. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see where it goes, actually. So just a few more questions. So what would you like to achieve with your work that you haven't done yet?
I mean, there's so much I haven't done yet. I mean, I feel like everything I haven't done yet. So I don't really look at it in terms of like, what do I want to achieve? I just keep going, you know, I just keep moving forward. You know, I don't really, I like to have goals, but yeah, I don't sort of think in terms of, okay, what would I like to achieve? I mean, there's little things like, oh, okay, I would like to curate my first show of sustainable art. I've never tried curation before, and it's like abstract art. It's a lot harder than it looks. So,
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
But it's something, you know, I'd like to try my hand at in the next year or two.
So what does it mean to be a successful artist, and how do you measure the success of your own work?
To be a successful artist, man, you know what, that I don't know. I don't know I've always wondered what success looks like. It's something I think about a lot because in a way it scares me a little, success. And I mean, quite honestly, I feel like I'm a successful artist now, and that's not because of any amount of sales or anything. I'm at a place where I'm sustaining myself. I have time to create. I have a great community around me that's very supportive. So all those little elements I feel are making me successful.
See, I think that's absolutely incredible. And I think that's a very valuable lesson, because success is subjective. You know, it's not about sales. It's not about, oh, you make, you know, £1 million from your work a year. That's not success. Success is internal. You know, success is how you value yourself. You know, you don't have to make the most money as long as you're happy and you're at like, as you said, like you're at a certain point. And I think that is like, you reach a point where you're like, okay, cool, this is what I want. I think that for me, at least, not that I to my answer my question, but at least for me, I feel like that's what success is. Like when you're at a point where you're comfortable and happy with what you're doing, I think that's perfect. And I think if you feel like you're a successful artist right now, I think that's absolutely incredible. And I commend you on that, to be honest, because not everybody feels that way. And it's good for you that you put in the time, hard work, and effort to be in this position.
If you put like a monetary value on your success, I think you're setting yourself up for some misery, because as an artist, you have a very inconsistent income stream, right? It you know, when it rains, it pours, and when it, you know, a drought, who knows how long that can go on for. So there's a lot of ups and downs. So that can't be how you measure success. And I have found that building a strong community has been the best marker for success and helps me sustain this, you know, kind of art business, art career that I have going. Yeah, finding kindred spirits.
I think that's beautiful. I think that really is beautiful, because I think, like, knowing people like Laurie especially, like, yeah, I can definitely see why community is important. Like absolutely. And just the fact you can meet people and they can really impact you, and you have no idea that that'll impact you in such a positive way and just such a different way is incredible. Like, I don't know,
Right.
like I think as community is so much more valuable than I think we realize, like especially. So
Yeah.
I
And when
absolutely know
people
that sentiment.
said that, somebody told me, oh, look at Instagram as, you know, community building. And at first, I really thought that was bullshit. I was like,
Mm,
we are all online. Like, give me a break. And then I started meeting a lot of, kind of like minded artists, or even some, that do nothing like what I do, but are just like super supportive and kind of cheering on your successes and cheering you up when things aren't going well. And I really did form this like community online. I met Lori online,
mm.
and then months later met her in person, and then months later went and saw her in New York, and just like keeping up these relationships. And then meeting people in real life is always just like crazy, especially after you've had this like online relationship.
Mm.
Like someone
Yeah.
like online dating, and then you meet each other
Yeah.
for the first time. It's like, oh my God, it's
No,
so exciting.
that's actually my plan for next year, hopefully, is I want to do some studio visits. I want to go and meet artists that I've spoken to. There are
Ooh.
a handful of artists that, particularly here, obviously in the UK, because international travel, maybe actually, but there are a few artists here in the UK that have said to me, "Oh, we should meet up. We should go to like a gallery show or something." And I'm like, "Absolutely! I'm going to get a train down to London to come and see you, 100%." So I'm like, I might do that next year, or like do artist promos and studio visits, that kind of stuff. I'm kind of interested in that at the minute. One of the many ideas I've got. So I think I agree with you completely. I went to the other art fair and I met a lot of artists, which is where I get a lot of my interviews from actually. I've got a lot of interviews to do from that. I went last year or this year, and I'm going to go next year because it's good. It's amazing to talk to people. Just stand there talking to people in real life about their work, and you're there
Yeah.
for a purpose. I don't know. I'm very interested in real life, which is funny. But when it comes to like talking to artists and people about art, it's so easy. But yeah. Anyways, the last question, because we can finish. So it would be, what are you currently working on, and where can people find more about you and your work?
Currently, I am working on these large scale monochromatic cardboard pieces. Um, I'm using, I'm doing, I'm actually doing them for certain businesses. And so I'm using all their
Oh,
boxes.
oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah. So one is using all shoe boxes of the brands they carry. And another one is of a different brand using all their packaging materials. And so I'm doing that. I'm also in the thick of my of planting season for my native
Perfect.
California trees. So every weekend I am out planting like a
That's
thousand
incredible.
acorns. And yeah, and so a lot of my work right now, or that I'm planning for the future, will be about that. Will be all about Los Angeles, which is a lot like most major cities across the world are losing their tree coverage.
Mm.
It's disappearing every year. There's a dramatic decrease in the amount of trees in the cities at a time when we need them most, right?
Yeah.
Especially in Los Angeles, the city is getting hotter and hotter every year, and we have a drought that's ongoing
Yeah,
with no end in sight. And we've had fires,
yeah, of course.
wildfires
Yeah.
in the middle of the city, which is
Really?
unheard of as of, I don't know, 5 years ago. Yeah, the Getty, which is, our
Yeah.
big, beautiful museum in town on the west side of Los Angeles, just miles from the beach. In 2019 was a huge fire that like surrounded the Getty Museum. So it's bizarre. And well, it's not really bizarre if you believe in climate change, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a problem, and it's something that I really want to focus on in my work, just to call attention to it, because it's a big deal.
Perfect. And where can people find your work online?
Online, my website, RebeccaYoussef.com, or follow me on Instagram, Rebecca Youssef Studio. come visit me in my studio. We're having monthly open studios now through June.
Rebecca, thank you so much for your time. This is absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Aaron. It was my pleasure.
That concludes my conversation with the amazing Rebecca Youssef. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions or comments about it, please send me an email at theflyingfruitroll@gmail.com or get in touch via social media sites such as Instagram and Twitter. The Flying Fruit Roll podcast is available on a variety of platforms such as Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. If you like the show, please consider rating, reviewing, sharing, or subscribing on any of those platforms to help spread the word. Please check out theflyingfruitroll.co.uk for daily art inspiration, and if you're a creative, please get in touch for a chance to be featured or interviewed. If you would like to support the platform further, we now have a Patreon page for monthly donations. Tiers start from £1, and for more information, please head on over to patreon.com/theflyingfruitroll. Alternatively, if monthly donations are not your thing, we also have a PayPal for one-time donations. I'll leave a link to our PayPal in the show notes. Once again, thank you very much for listening to this interview today. And until next time, folks, please stay safe.